Persistent, steadfast, and committed are just a few adjectives to describe our next inductee. Doug Kaltenbach guided the highly successful Westfield Wolverines baseball team for over 30 years. During this time, his teams won over 75% of their games with Doug at the helm. He led the Wolverines to 8 Section 6 championship appearances and won Section 6 titles in 2015 and 16. His 2015 team went on to win the Far West Regional Championship and was a state finalist. He won 14 Chautauqua County Athletic Association titles, was a 13-time CCAA Division Coach of the Year, and from 2014 to 2017 guided his teams to 55 consecutive league victories. He was also named the Post-Journal Coach of the Year in 2011 and 2015. In 2011, Doug sustained a life-threatening arm injury that would have sidelined most people for months. Not Doug. Despite 5 surgeries and a year and a half of intense occupational therapy, he continued to teach high school art class and coach his beloved Wolverine baseball team with the help of assistant coaches Mansfield and Martin, and together they led the team to an undefeated CCAA League Championship and a berth in the Section 6 Finals. It was through this life-changing experience that Doug taught his players the value of keeping a positive outlook and being persistent in achieving your goals. Coach Kaltenbach's career record of 476 wins and 154 losses ranks him as having the 3rd most wins in Chautauqua County baseball history and 6th most in Section 6 history. A 1978 graduate of Brockton Central School and the State University of New York at Fredonia, I'm pleased to have Doug Kaltenbach as an inductee into the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame class of 2024.
Thank you very much. I feel like I should be up here surrounded by the 400 or so players that I've coached over my 30 years. Without them, I obviously wouldn't be standing here. You have to excuse me, I had bronchitis. I'm not sure how much you believe in fate, but I have to tell you a quick little story. Back in 1987, I was going for my first teaching job as an art teacher in Westfield. And I was meeting with my the principal at the time, whose name is Dennis Shively, who is here tonight. Thank you. Anyhow, I was getting drilled with all these educational questions, like you always do. And in the middle of it, his secretary came in and said, "Excuse me, Dennis, I got to talk to you a second." He excused himself and left, came back in and continued the interview. During the interview, he said to me then, "Okay, so if you get this job, would you want to do extracurricular things?" And I said, "Yeah, when I'm ready, sure, absolutely." And he says, "Would you ever want to coach?" And I said, "Yeah, I would love to coach when the time is right. I would love to coach." He says, "What sport would you like to coach if you could coach?" And I said, "I think baseball." He says, "Well, as a matter of fact, the call I just took was that our baseball coach quit." I'm like, "Okay." So he says, "If you were to get the job, would you consider that? Would you consider doing it?" And I said, of course I wanted a job, so I said, "Yeah, I think starting at a JV level would be great, since I never coached before." And Dennis looked at me, and I'll never forget, he said, "No, I think you should be a varsity coach." And from that moment, actually, the rest is history. I basically got 2 jobs with 1 interview. And I was lucky. I also coached from that moment until the moment I retired 30 years later. So anyhow, it's just a funny story. I'd like to thank the Hall of Fame again for this honor. It's truly humbling. I can't help stand up here without thinking of the tens of thousands of batting practice balls I threw, and the fungo balls, which you don't know are basically hitting a ball, the thousands of fungo balls I hit over my 30-year career to get me here. It seems unreal that it would end here tonight to me. First and foremost, I need to thank people, obviously. First and foremost, like I said, is I want to thank my wife Jane and my daughter Olivia. They put up with being a Western New York spring baseball coach, and if you've never done that, it's brutal. Through the canceled vacations and dinners and not knowing a schedule from one day to another or what was going to happen. They supported me, and they made it all possible, and I love you for what you did. Next, I need to thank my 2 longtime assistant coaches, who, again, I wouldn't be here without them. Don Mansfield and Dan Martin. Don was the varsity coach before I got to Westfield, and he agreed to come on and help me, and Don was my assistant for 20 years. Dan was my assistant for 15 years, and they stuck with me through thick and thin. The best thing is I was lucky to have my best friends with me to lean on and be a sounding board, and trust me, there was a lot of sounding to listen to. As I mentioned before, though, I need to thank my players and their families. The relationships that I formed with my players will remain with me for the rest of my life. I've always thought of you at the time and now as if you were my sons. And I try to do the best for each and every one of you every day. Over the years, I would often have people ask me, how the heck does your team win so much? My reaction was always quick to say, I'm lucky, I have talented players. But I've often thought about that, and I felt and knew that there was a lot more to our winning than just talent. After all, there's a lot of talented teams out there that don't win. And I was always proud of our teams based on a couple things, the way we handled some different things, such as the way we handled failure and remaining positive. I believe knowing that how to deal with failure in baseball and life are so important. Baseball is a game where you're going to fail at some point. You can't help it. It's inevitable. You're out there, you're pitching, you're hitting, you're fielding all by yourself. You can't hide behind anybody, and you have to go on and deal with it. I would remind my players that you're going to fail at times, and I would also remind them how important it was, again, to deal with it. As their coach, it was my job to convince them that it's not what you do during that play, but what matters the most is what you do after that play. For example, it's an old baseball adage. I would tell them, if you go to the plate to hit and you only get on base 3 times, that's considered successful, even though you didn't get on base 7. I would remind them that to be successful, you didn't have to be 100% successful. And dealing with mistakes was one of the keys to our success. It didn't mean having a fit, throwing equipment, or pouting. It meant forgetting the mistake and moving on to become a better player. Along with dealing with accepting failure was knowing how to play with a positive frame of mind. And they're kind of the same. I always felt while coaching, staying positive was one of the hardest things both on and off the field for players and coaches alike. As they said earlier, in February of 2011, that was put to the test with me. I had a life-threatening accident. I cut my left hand above my wrist severely with a miter saw on a cold September snowy day. With uncontrollable bleeding, I got down screaming for my wife, and luckily through coaching and first aid, I knew enough to make a tourniquet, which saved my life. I was rushed immediately to the ECMC Trauma Center, where doctors told me they weren't sure if they could save my hand. However, they said I should consider myself lucky to be alive. A few days later, I underwent an 11-hour operation to reattach my left hand. I then had 5 other surgeries and did almost 2 years of daily occupational therapy to regain function in my hands. And I can honestly say that I tried my best to remain positive throughout that whole experience. I'm convinced that staying positive allowed me to gain my hand back and move forward in my life. At the time of my accident, I was told by the doctors that I wouldn't probably coach or teach again that year, since it was in February. And the season started in 3 weeks. Well, I did. I taught and I coached. I went back in 2 weeks. And with the support of my entire team, we finished undefeated as the CCAC champions and went to the Sectional 6 finals for the 4th year in a row. I always tried to use my personal situation and attitude as a learning experience with my players and students. I found that the power of a positive mindset became a great tool for the teams to rally and lean on. It became contagious among my players, and ultimately it led Westfield baseball program to many victories. I just want to end with a quick story about positive thinking here, which I think sums it up. We were in the middle of our 55-game winning streak, and the pressure on these guys were starting to mount. 55 games meant that it was 4 separate baseball teams that this streak was going over, and in baseball, anything can go wrong. Could have a bad pitching day, whatever. But anyhow, our hitting was kind of taking it. They weren't hitting good, and everyone was too nervous. So one day I said to them, I was thinking, I used to do whatever it was, whatever it took to win, we would do it. I brought in somebody specialized in meditation and deep breathing to relax. That didn't work. I tried everything. So one day I sat down, I put him in the dugout before practice, and I said, you guys sit in the dugout, I want to talk to you. So they're sitting there looking at me, and I proceeded to tell them the story that I made up. I said that I've been doing a lot of research and checking like a lot of cultures and trying to find something that will change things to the positive, something that will snap us out of this hitting funk. And I said, everything I looked at on the internet involved a dead chicken. So you can imagine, I have 15, 18, 17-year-old boys staring at me like, what the hell's he talking about? So I bent over and grabbed my bag, and I pulled out a rubber chicken and a hammer and a nail. And they're looking at me, and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We nailed that rubber chicken to the dugout wall. And I said, every time you leave this dugout to hit, you're going to touch this chicken for good luck. So I'm thinking this is never going to work. Well, it became part of our team. From that moment on, our team batting average went up 100 points. We went undefeated from that moment on. When we went to the New York State Finals. And everywhere we went, we took that rubber chicken and we nailed it on the dugout. So I guess in the end, maybe the chicken should be up here, not me. Anyhow, thank you for this honor, and I totally appreciate it. Thank you.
So is that why they said your team was always plucky?
Yeah. You should have seen their look in their face when I did that. They're like,